Facebook Live, I want to talk about some tried and tested activities that I use on a regular basis today. But I'm just going to look just to check we haven't had any questions either. So when I do post about the Facebook Live, uh, I am very welcome to having any questions from you that you want to ask me, and I can try and answer them in this Facebook Live, which is becoming a regular weekly event. So today I'm going to just talk about some tried and tested activities that I use in class. You may recognize some of them. If you've been on training with me, you might know one or two of these activities. The first one is to practice present perfect. So a piece of grammar, one of the tenses that we use a lot in general conversations. And we use, or we can use, the present perfect to talk about life experiences. So the activity I use is have you ever. You may have read about this or tried this yourself, and I make little cards with a verb and an object. So for example, to break a bone, and the object is in a mingle activity where the students get together, they will ask each other, have you ever broken a bone? I always give a couple of minutes before we start the mingle for the students to make their questions on their card, and I will try and monitor to make sure that they're accurate with that before they actually get a chance to speak with their classmates and ask them these questions. And I already as well, before the activity, explain the nature or the format of a conversation, that it might start with a present perfect question, have you ever broken a bone? And then it's often a yes or no answer, but then you may ask follow-up questions. Oh, when did that happen? Or when did you do that? To continue with the conversation, and this would be a natural progression. So I have lots of prompts for that question. So break a bone, ride a horse, swim a river, sing in public, for example. And they will change that, make it into a question, have you ever? It provides some natural conversation. I can monitor and I can feed back and give some delayed error correction afterwards. I usually put some music on as well, make it a bit of a party atmosphere. It could be a warmer, I suppose, but it certainly does work well if you're teaching a lesson about present perfect. So that's one idea that I use quite regularly. I use it in teacher training as well as a mingle activity to demonstrate what type of activity that is. So I find it really, really useful to have. Another activity that I use is and, but, and because to practice conjunctions. So here I will set it up that they will work in pairs, the students, and they will take it in turn to continue some of sentences I give them. So I give them a sentence stem, such as I'm tired and I'm going to bed. I'm tired, but I've got to finish this essay. I'm tired because I've been up all night studying. So I'll give them some examples first on the board, and then I'll give them a sentence stem that they need to complete with and, but, or because. The coffee is good, but blah blah blah, or and blah blah blah. He married Stella and blah blah blah, but blah blah blah, because blah blah blah. They can choose which word they're going to use, so it's it's additional information with and, or it's a contrasting information with but, for example. I often use students' own names in this activity, so I personalize it because it can be quite fun and a bit silly. Another activity I'm going to share with you today is to practice the passive voice. You can ask the class to listen to these questions and note down some key words. Then in their pairs, they can answer questions about a country that they know well. So these are in particular process questions where we would use the passive voice. It's also good practice for IELTS Part 1. What raw materials are produced? What is exported and imported? What is manufactured? How are politicians elected? What alcohol is made? What sports are played? So just some questions, sort of like the sentence stem in the previous activity. Some questions that pairs can discuss. Perhaps they can make some notes, and perhaps they can even make some full sentences. You could ask for a number of items back. So, for example, tell me three of these. What is exported and imported, for example? I'm just going to give you one more, and that is to, let me think, I'm going to look at the frequency adverbs. So I will write a scale on the board, and I often use numbers or maths in some of my grammar presentations because they can make it quite relatable. So for frequency adverbs, something like always or rarely, we can make a scale of 100% to 0. 100% is always something that happens on a regular basis, is constant, whereas 0 is an action that never happens. So I can make this scale on the board, and if I tell them that always is 100% and never is 0%, we can go through the other frequency adverbs and give them a number. So it might be, I will give them some examples, such as often, sometimes, or rarely. And I can also add some quantifiers, almost always, very often. And they can plot onto my scale where they think those phrases would go, or those frequency adverbs. I've actually given them to you in a list in the order that I would have them on the scale, from always, almost always, very often, often, sometimes, rarely, seldom, very rarely, almost never, and never is your 0. So once we have the scale on the board, we can then go through with the students. We could brainstorm some activities that you might do during the week. For example, play golf, go shopping, um, watch Netflix, or so they can be indoors, outdoors, sort of related to hobbies. And then using the scale on the board between always and never, they can discuss with their partner these activities. How often do they do them? So you can set up a conversation that would start with probably with a question. How often do you watch Netflix? Or how often do you play golf, for example? And they can make up a conversation. I never play golf, or I sometimes, or I often play golf with my dad, for example. So you can give them some vocabulary to sort of play with in order to figure out the frequency of these hobbies or actions that they do. So there is 3 or 4 ideas, some activities. They are mostly language based. We've looked at frequency adverbs, passive voice, conjunctions, and present perfect. So hopefully that might help you to do something in class this week or next week. I'll be back next week on another Facebook Live, and this time I'll remember to tell you about it a bit earlier in the week. And don't forget, you can ask me any questions in the comments box. Thanks very much.